In 1899, the United States controlled the Philippines, a nation of over 7,000 islands on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, home to millions of people who had never set foot in America. At its territorial peak, the U.S. flag flew over lands spanning from the Caribbean to the Western Pacific, covering hundreds of thousands of square miles beyond the continental states. But today, most people couldn't name even 3 U.S. territories. So what happened to America's empire and what pieces of it actually remain? Let's rewind to the turn of the 20th century when the United States was rapidly expanding beyond its borders. The big turning point came in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. Almost overnight, the U.S. acquired Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The Philippines alone, with a population of around 7 million at the time, became America's largest territorial possession. For the next 5 decades, the U.S. governed these islands directly, complete with American-appointed governors and military presence. Then there was the Panama Canal Zone. In 1903, the United States essentially carved out a 10-mile-wide strip of land across Panama to build and control one of the world's most strategic waterways. For 76 years, this zone was American territory in all but name. U.S. law applied, American courts operated there, and even the police wore U.S. uniforms. Cuba presents an interesting case. Though never formally a U.S. territory, Cuba was under American military occupation from 1898 to 1902, and the Platt Amendment gave the U.S. the right to intervene in Cuban affairs until 1934. That same amendment also granted the U.S. a permanent lease on Guantanamo Bay, which, yes, America still holds today. After World War II, the territorial footprint expanded again, but differently. The U.S. administered parts of Germany and Japan during occupation, and took control of former Japanese territories in the Pacific under UN trusteeship agreements. Islands like the Northern Marianas and the Marshall Islands came under American control, creating what was essentially a strategic Pacific network. By the mid-20th century, the American flag flew over more than 500,000 square miles of territory outside the 50 states, with millions of people living under U.S. governance who couldn't vote in U.S. elections. Fast forward to today. The United States still controls territories, 5 major ones to be exact, and they're home to nearly 4 million people. Puerto Rico is by far the largest, with about 3.2 million residents. It's been a U.S. territory since 1898, and its people are U.S. citizens, though they can't vote in presidential elections unless they move to the mainland. Puerto Rico has voted multiple times on statehood, but the issue remains unresolved. Guam, in the Western Pacific, has about 170,000 people and hosts major U.S. military installations. Like Puerto Rico, Guamanians are U.S. citizens but lack voting representation in Congress. The U.S. Virgin Islands, purchased from Denmark in 1917, are home to about 87,000 people in the Caribbean. American citizens, same voting restrictions. American Samoa is unique. Its 46,000 residents are U.S. nationals, not citizens, meaning they need to go through naturalization to get full citizenship rights, even though they're born under the American flag. And the Northern Mariana Islands, with around 47,000 people, became a U.S. Commonwealth in 1978, part of the post-World War II Pacific Trust Territories. All these territories operate under U.S. federal law, use the U.S. dollar, and are defended by the U.S. military, but their residents don't have the same political rights as those living in the states. It's a form of control that looks a lot like empire, even if we don't call it that. So what happened to the rest? The Philippines is the most significant example. After decades of Filipino resistance and changing American attitudes toward colonialism, especially after World War II, the U.S. granted the Philippines full independence in 1946. The days of overt territorial empire were becoming politically untenable, both internationally and domestically. The Panama Canal Zone was returned to Panama in 1999 under treaties signed by President Jimmy Carter in 1977. The rationale was partly moral, it was Panamanian land after all, and partly practical. The U.S. could maintain access and influence without direct control. Most of the Pacific Trust territories also transitioned. The Marshall Islands, Palau, and the Federated States of Micronesia became independent nations in the 1980s and 90s, though they maintained compact of free association agreements with the U.S., which basically means America still handles their defense and provides economic support. The pattern is clear. Formal territorial control became diplomatically expensive and morally questionable in the post-colonial era. Letting go looked better and often worked just as well for American strategic interests. So, what remains of the US empire? In the territorial sense, the way we think of the British or Spanish empires, what's left is mostly small, a handful of islands in the Pacific and Caribbean, home to millions of people with limited political voice. The age of overt American colonialism is over, but the infrastructure of influence, the bases, the alliances, the economic leverage, that's a different story. The empire didn't disappear, it evolved. Here's a question for you. Is controlling territory the real measure of empire, or is it about power and influence regardless of who technically owns the land? Let me know what you think in the comments.